The advertisement promised solitude and adventure, a summer spent keeping watch over a vast, green wilderness, but it failed to mention what would be watching me in return. I remember the flyer. It was tacked to a corkboard in the student union, faded print advertising a summer position as a fire lookout. Remote location, decent pay, an escape from the city's relentless hum. It spoke to a yearning in me, a desire for something primal and untamed, a clean slate. Caleb Vance, a city boy with a head full of romantic notions about nature, thought it sounded like an adventure. I packed my meager belongings, sold off anything I wouldn't need, and set off, leaving behind the cacophony of concrete and ambition for 3 months of promised isolation. It's only been a few days since I arrived, but already the city feels like a dream. And this place, this colossal, breathing forest, feels like an eternity. The drive itself was a descent into another world. Paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a winding dirt track barely wide enough for a single vehicle. As I climbed higher, the trees swallowed the sky, their thick canopy blocking out the sun in places, creating a perpetual twilight. Civilization vanished behind me, not just out of sight but out of mind. No power lines, no distant glow of streetlights, no faint echo of sirens. Just an endless expanse of emerald and umber stretching to the horizon in every direction, an unbroken blanket of silent sentinels. It was breathtaking, a symphony of green yet terrifying in its immensity. The silence was absolute, a profound quiet that pressed in on my ears, making them ring. It was the kind of quiet that lets you hear the thumping of your own heart, the whisper of your own breath, and then slowly other things. The air up here, near the summit where my new home awaited, was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Sunlight, fractured into golden shards, pierced the dense foliage, dappling the forest floor with shifting patterns of light and shadow. A thrill, a pure, unadulterated sense of awe, surged through me as I stepped out of my truck, inhaling deeply. This was it. This was the wild, raw, untamed. But beneath the exhilaration, a cold tendril of fear snaked its way into my gut. This place was vast, indifferent, and undeniably alive. I knew there were creatures out here capable of ending a life, creatures that moved unseen. The thought of a bear, a cougar, made the hairs on my arms prickle. I tried to shake off the unease, focusing instead on the narrow, winding path that led higher still, towards the silhouette of the old fire tower. Silas Thorne, the grizzled district ranger, had told me he'd be waiting. "Kid, you finally made it." A voice, rough like gravel, cut through the silence. Silas Thorne stood on the wooden porch of the lookout, a tall, imposing figure with a frame that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hair was a silver mane, neatly framing a face etched with the lines of sun and wind. A thick, well-maintained beard obscured most of his jaw, but his eyes, a startling shade of blue, held a warmth that belied his gruff exterior. He extended a calloused hand. "Silas Thorne. Good to finally put a face to the voice." I shook his hand, feeling a strange mix of awkwardness and immediate respect. "Caleb Vance," I managed, my voice a little reedy. I gestured towards the tower, its weathered wood and steel structure rising against the backdrop of the impossibly blue sky. "So this is it. My summer castle," Silas chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "That it is, son. Best view in the whole district. You'll see when we get up top. But first, let's get you settled." He led me inside, the interior surprisingly cozy despite its rustic simplicity. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, dominated by a small propane stove in one corner. He showed me the tiny bathroom, explaining the composting toilet and the need for regular emptying into an outdoor pit. "No shower up here, boy," he'd said with a wink. "Just a good old-fashioned outhouse down by the pines if nature calls for more than a quick rinse." My sleeping quarters were compact, just enough space for a narrow cot tucked against a wall beneath a window facing southeast, the direction from which most wildfires typically approached. "You'll be spending a lot of time in here," Silas remarked as we re-emerged from the tower's ground floor, back out into the sharp mountain air. He then led me up the steep metal staircase, the treads groaning faintly under our weight, towards the observation platform perched atop the structure. "And here she is," Silas announced, gesturing expansively with a sweep of his arm. "The Grand Tour." The view was indeed breathtaking. From this height, perhaps 50 feet above the ground, the forest spread out below me like a living map, an endless tapestry of greens, golds, and browns. It felt like standing on the very crown of the world, the air thin and pure, the horizon a distant, hazy line. Silas began pointing out landmarks, explaining the vast distances visible in every direction. He demonstrated the use of the powerful binoculars and the spotting scope, mounted on a sturdy tripod near the railings. "Your main job, Caleb, is to keep your eyes peeled. Any smoke, any unusual haze on the horizon, you radio it in immediately. You see flames, well, then you grab a shovel and get down there and you pray it's not too big." I nodded, trying to absorb every instruction, every caution. "Don't worry," Silas added, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It's rarely that exciting. Most days are quiet. Just make sure you're scanning the perimeter every hour on the hour, and don't fall asleep on the job." He winked again, a gesture I couldn't quite decipher, a half-joke that held a subtle, unsettling undertone. "You'll be fine, kid. Just don't do anything stupid. No smoking up here, no candles. Understand?" I nodded once more. The absurdity of smoking or lighting a candle in a wooden tower surrounded by parched forest not lost on me with a final wave and a promise to check in via radio next week. Silas Thorne climbed into his beat-up pickup truck and rumbled down the winding dirt road, disappearing around a bend and back towards the world I had just left. As the distant hum of his engine faded into the profound silence, my heart began to hammer against my ribs. It felt like being dropped on Mars without a map or a guide. But this was what I had come for, wasn't it? To shed the old skin, to immerse myself in the raw, untamed heart of nature. I decided to start with the basics, to make this tower my own. The previous lookout had kept it remarkably clean, but a thin film of dust coated every surface, a silent testament to the long, empty period between occupants. I grabbed a broom and began to sweep, the rhythmic swish-swish of the bristles against the floorboards echoing in the suddenly vast space. As I swept under the narrow cot, my hand brushed against something cold and hard. I knelt, peering into the dusty gloom, and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. Its cover was stiff, its pages brittle with age, and a fine layer of grime clung to its surface. There were no dates, no discernible order, just a history written in a multitude of hands. The first few pages were neat, practical lists, supplies for cooking, cleaning, first aid kit inventories. There were notes on radio procedures, emergency contact numbers, all the standard operational details. But as I flipped further, the entries began to change, becoming less like a logbook and more like a personal journal. The handwriting varied wildly, sometimes elegant and flowing, sometimes jagged and desperate. It was clear these were entries from different lookouts, perhaps spanning decades. Then, buried deep within the journal, I found it. A single page, stark and unnerving, written in a cramped, almost manic script. "Do not look outside after sunset. If you hear steps coming up the stairs at night, hide. If you see something outside your window looking back at you from below, pretend you didn't see anything. Do not be tempted by voices calling your name or cries for help. They are not real. Never under any circumstances open the door after dark. If you hear whispers, do not acknowledge them. They feed on attention. The forest has eyes. It has ears. It has a hunger. Do not leave the tower after dark. Ever. If you feel a presence, do not react. Be still. Be silent." The list went on for several more lines, each rule more chilling than the last, before cutting off abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence, their hand torn from the page. I chuckled nervously, a dry, hollow sound that seemed too loud in the sudden silence of the tower. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank, a tradition among the lookouts, a way to initiate the new guy. Sela's thorn, probably. A test of my nerves. Yet a sliver of genuine fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my dismissive laughter as my eyes drifted over those words again. They are not real. But what if they were? The sun, a giant, molten orange, began its slow descent beyond the jagged silhouette of the distant mountains. Shadows lengthened, swallowing the light from the room, painting the interior in shades of deepening gray. I busied myself with preparing a simple dinner on the tiny propane stove, the aroma of heating food a small comfort against the growing unease. The daylight was fading fast, and I kept glancing at the darkening windows, the words from the journal echoing in my mind. Do not look outside after sunset. I laughed again, a forced, brittle sound trying to shake off the creeping dread as I ate my meal. The forest outside, once a welcoming presence, now felt like a vast, watchful entity. As dusk bled into true night, the sounds began. At first they were familiar, comforting noises of the wilderness settling in for the evening. The rustle of leaves as a creature moved through the undergrowth, the sharp crack of a twig underfoot, the distant hoot of an owl. I told myself it was just a deer, a raccoon, a fox. The forest teemed with life, I reminded myself, forcing a calm I didn't feel. But as the darkness deepened, shrouding the trees in impenetrable shadow, the sounds subtly shifted. They no longer sounded like any animal I knew, at least not any native to these mountains. They were closer now, a soft, shuffling gait that was too slow, too deliberate to be a deer. A faint, low thrum seemed to emanate from the very air, vibrating in my bones. I felt it then, a profound, undeniable sense of being watched from the depths of the black woods beyond my window. And then the journal's rules screamed in my mind. Don't look outside after dark. My heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. An irresistible urge, a perverse curiosity pulled me towards the window, just a peek, just to confirm it was nothing. No, don't do it. A frantic voice shrieked inside my head, a desperate plea for self-preservation. But my hand, as if acting on its own accord, lifted towards the flimsy curtain. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I drew it aside. My breath hitched. Several heartbeats skipped. Shapes, moving among the trees, indistinct against the overwhelming darkness. Their movements were not fluid, not natural. They were jerky, almost marionette-like, a disturbing, unnatural rhythm that was both terrifying and utterly mesmerizing. It was like something glimpsed in a fever dream, an impression of forms that logic rejected, yet my eyes undeniably perceived. I recoiled from the window, a desperate gasp escaping my lips, releasing the curtain so abruptly it slapped back against its rod with a loud, violent snap. My fear exploded, a cold, icy wave that consumed me. It's nothing, I tried to rationalize, my voice a shaky whisper, just your mind playing tricks. You're alone, you're tired. But deep down, another, colder voice replied, no, Caleb. Those weren't normal forest noises, and those shapes, they weren't animals. I scrambled backwards, pressing myself against the wall, eyes wide, fixed on the black rectangle of the window. The silence outside seemed to deepen, to become heavier. As if the very air was holding its breath that night, my sleep was a torment. Dreams twisted and writhed, vivid and terrifying. I saw them, the shadowy figures, tall and impossibly thin, whispering to each other in the gloom of the forest. They moved with that same jerky, unnatural gait, their limbs elongated, their forms indistinct. Each time I blinked they were closer, their non-faces turned towards me, the sensation of their gaze burning even through the veil of sleep. I was running, always running, through an endless labyrinth of trees, my heart a desperate drum in my chest, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. My legs, heavy as lead, refused to cooperate, yet somehow they kept moving, propelling me further into the nightmare. I jolted awake several times, each time drenched in a cold sweat, my breathing ragged. The quiet of the forest outside my window, now devoid of the disturbing sounds of the night, offered no comfort. It's just your imagination, I repeated, a frantic mantra, just the isolation. But the words felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the lingering terror. As the first tendrils of dawn touched the eastern horizon, painting the trees in a soft, ethereal light, a profound rush of relief washed over me. The golden light, pure and clean, seemed to banish the lingering shadows of my dreams, pushing the unseen horrors back into their hidden corners. The dream images faded, but an eerie, persistent feeling clung to me, like the first frost of autumn, a chill that promised the slow creep of winter. Looking out, the forest appeared serene, bathed in the gentle glow, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, creating a mosaic of shifting light and shadow. But I knew better now. Beneath the surface beauty within those impossibly thick woods was a darkness that no sunbeam could ever penetrate, a darkness that had watched me. I wondered what this new day would bring as I rose from my cot, my body aching with exhaustion, and dressed for another day alone on this isolated peak. The morning routine was a mechanical comfort. A fire lookout's primary duty was observation, but there were other tasks, equipment checks, cleaning, radio logs. But my mind was a fractured landscape that morning. The whispers began subtly, almost imperceptible at first, carried on the faintest breath of wind, a delicate, almost musical murmur that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. It was like a radio left on, just out of range, its faint, garbled transmission barely audible. They persisted, a constant, low hum beneath the surface of the forest's quiet, a maddening, persistent annoyance finally. Unable to bear it any longer, I snatched up my binoculars, sweeping the vast panorama visible from my perch. Miles and miles of green, stretching into infinity until the distant mountains blurred into the hazy horizon. Nothing. No hikers, no signs of human activity, which struck me as odd. This time of year the trails should be bustling. But so far in almost 2 weeks I hadn't seen a single soul. I lowered the binoculars, a sigh escaping my lips, feeling foolish. But then, as if in response to my resignation, the whispers intensified, wrapping around me, soft and intimate. They were no longer just sounds. They were words, my name. Caleb. Caleb Vance. A primal dread, a cold dread, tightened its grip on my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but where? The voice in my head, the one that had warned me not to look, to hide, now urged me to explore, to understand. But I knew, with a certainty that vibrated through my bones, that it was a trap. The forest was too vast, too labyrinthine. I had no GPS, no compass, just a crude map with squiggly lines. I forced myself to stay put, to push the terrifying thoughts away, to focus on the mundane tasks of the day. But the night brought a new, chilling escalation. As darkness blanketed the forest, muffling all sound, a distinct sound began to penetrate the silence. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy, climbing the metal staircase that led to my tower. Thump, thump, thump. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic hummingbird. The rule from the journal screamed in my mind. Hide if you must, but don't let them see you. I dropped to my hands and knees, scrambling under the narrow cot, scraping my knees against the rough floorboards, biting back a whimper of pure terror. The footsteps drew closer, louder, until they stopped directly outside my door. A pause, a beat of agonizing silence. Then they continued, passing my door, ascending the final few steps to the observation deck above. Whispers followed, too faint at first, then growing clearer, cutting through the thin floorboards above my head. Caleb, oh Caleb, the sound of my own name, spoken by unseen things, twisted my gut. Come out, wherever you are, don't be afraid. We just want to talk, we promise we won't hurt you. The voices, plural now, continued, a soft, coaxing chorus that stretched time, turning minutes into an agonizing eternity. I pressed myself further into the dusty confines beneath the cot, trying to make myself smaller, invisible, willing myself into oblivion. The sounds of their slow, measured steps, the soft, sibilant whispers, echoed directly above me, filling the tower, filling my head. Eventually, mercifully, their voices faded, along with the distinct sound of their footsteps descending the stairs. Silence returned, heavy and oppressive, a vacuum that pressed in on me. I remained under the cot for another hour, listening, waiting, my muscles screaming in protest. the adrenaline making me shake uncontrollably. Was it safe? Finally, with trembling hands, I crawled out, remaining on all fours for a long time, straining my ears for any hint of their return. The night remained quiet, a profound, eerie stillness that was almost worse than the sounds. After another agonizing half-hour, my legs aching with pins and needles, I slowly, cautiously stood. My knees felt like jelly, threatening to buckle beneath me, but I managed to hobble back to my cot. Sleep, however, was a distant impossibility. Every rustle outside, every creak of the old tower made me jump. Their voices, their insidious promises, echoed in my mind. The image of those shadowy figures, their eyes glowing red in the dark, watching me from under their hoods, burned into my memory. Dawn, when it finally arrived, was a gift. I rose immediately, shaking off the lingering nightmares, desperate for the cleansing light. After a quick wash in the freezing water from my jug, I started the coffee percolator, the rich aroma a small comfort. The morning routine was a rigid anchor in the swirling chaos of my mind. I poured myself a steaming cup, sat at my desk by the window, and pulled out an old, blank notebook, a relic from a previous lookout. I began to fill it, not with the usual logs, but with the raw, terrifying details of the previous night's events. First, the weather report, a mundane necessity. Then the wildlife sightings, though what I'd seen certainly wasn't wildlife in any conventional sense. By 8 o'clock, the forms were filled, transmitted via satellite. Mr. Thorne would know I was alive. For now. The rest of the day stretched before me, an empty expanse of waiting late afternoon. I was lost in the pages of a forgotten novel, trying to distract myself from the lingering unease when I heard it. Faint at first, almost swallowed by the wind, but growing steadily louder, more distinct. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It sounded like someone was hitting the base of the tower with a heavy object, or perhaps throwing rocks. My heart lurched. I looked out the window, and there she was, a woman, standing near the base of the lookout tower, her head tilted back, gazing up at me. She had long, dark hair, tangled and windswept, and striking, bright blue eyes. When she saw me, she waved, a wide, easy smile on her face, as if we were old friends, as if her sudden appearance in this desolate place was entirely normal. "Hello there," she called, her voice surprisingly clear. "Can you let me in? It's getting dark out here." I descended the stairs, my mind a jumble of caution and desperate relief. Another human, finally. I opened the door. "Thanks so much," she said, stepping inside, shrugging off a rain-soaked jacket. "Lost track of time hiking today." She didn't seem perturbed by her drenched appearance. "You're welcome," I replied, a strained politeness in my voice. "Are you all right? You didn't get caught in that storm, did you?" "It's just water," she dismissed, a slight shrug. "I'm Alara, by the way, Alara Hayes." She extended a hand, and I took it, her grip surprisingly strong. "Caleb Vance." I hesitated, wondering if I should tell her about the unsettling events of the past few days or keep them to myself. "Nice place you've got here, Caleb," she said, surveying the tower's interior. "I love how peaceful it is out here." "Yeah," I agreed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Peaceful. That felt like a lifetime ago. Despite my wariness, a part of me was grateful for the company. Maybe, just maybe, she could help me make sense of this night fell again. And Alara, despite my protests about the limited space, insisted on staying. "I don't mind sleeping on the floor," she'd said, unrolling a sleeping bag near my cot with an easy shrug. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky ablaze with stars, twinkling like countless diamonds through the tower windows. The celestial display, usually a source of comfort, now filled me with a strange unease. I knew how quickly things could change up here, especially after dark. I had a gnawing certainty that the horrors of the previous nights would return, but this time, at least, I wouldn't be alone. The night, however, was far from calm. Shadows danced and writhed on the walls, twisting familiar objects into grotesque forms. The wind howled outside, a mournful, disembodied wail that seemed to carry unseen voices. Sleep was impossible for me, my mind a frantic maelstrom of fear and confusion. "Alara," astonishingly, seemed unaffected. She lay perfectly still in her sleeping bag, her breathing slow and even, an enviable picture of repose. Then a thunderous clap, a sound like God tearing the sky in two, shook the entire tower, jolting me violently awake. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, and cold sweat slicked my skin. I tried to calm myself, repeating Sela's Thorn's words like a mantra. It's just an animal. It's just an animal. But the words offered no solace when Alara suddenly cried out beside me, her voice sharp with terror. Caleb, Caleb, look! My eyes snapped open, straining against the oppressive darkness. Another flash of lightning momentarily illuminated the world outside, revealing a rocky ledge 20 feet below our window. What is it? I whispered urgently, trying to override my own rising panic, remembering Silas's admonition to remain calm. I saw something, Alara exclaimed, her eyes wide, staring fixedly at the window. There was someone standing right there. My heart skipped a beat, then returned to a frantic, erratic rhythm, adrenaline surging through me. Are you sure? I asked, my voice barely audible, desperate for reassurance, desperate for it not to be true. Positive, she whispered, her voice trembling. It was a face, just for a second, but it was staring right at me. My gaze was drawn inexorably to the window she pointed to, and there, starkly outlined against the fleeting flash of another lightning strike, I saw it. A long, bony finger, impossibly thin, tapping gently, delicately against the glass from the outside without a second thought. I grabbed Alara's arm, pulling her away from the window, dragging her further into the center of the small room, where the shadows were deeper, where we would be less visible. What are you doing? She gasped, her eyes wide with bewilderment. We need to stay away from the windows, I explained, my voice low and urgent. That's one of the rules. She nodded, her gaze darting nervously around the room, as if expecting whatever was out there to come crashing through the glass at any moment. I forced myself to speak calmly, injecting an authority I didn't feel. We need to stay calm. Whatever that thing is or whoever they are, they're just trying to scare us. They want us to panic so we'll make mistakes. Alara nodded again, silent now, clutching my arm so tightly I could feel the tremor in her fingers. Okay, I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't possess. We need to follow the guidelines, just like Silas told me. What's procedure? She whispered, her voice barely a breath. First, we keep our voices down. Whatever's out there can't hear us talking about it. My voice was a whisper, almost lost in the roar of the storm. Then we go back to the cot. Lie down. Pretend nothing is happening. She nodded, a flicker of understanding in her terrified eyes, and followed me across the room. We lay on our sleeping bags, facing away from each other, our backs to the windows, feigning oblivion, but something within both of us knew, with a terrible certainty, that the night was only just beginning. Alara left the next morning, after a strained breakfast. The sun was up, the forest looked deceptively peaceful, but the memory of the night clung to me like a shroud. She gave me her phone number, told me to call if anything else happened, but I knew it was useless. What could she do? She was miles away by now, descending back into the world of paved roads and electricity. A pang of regret, sharp and cold, shot through me. Why hadn't I left with her? But then the stubborn pride, the misguided sense of duty, reared its head. There was still a week left on my contract. Besides, leaving now felt like cowardice. The day dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity. My unease grew with each passing hour. The strange sounds, the whispers, had ceased. The forest was unnaturally quiet, and that, somehow, was worse. I kept expecting to see movement in the trees, a flicker of shadow, but nothing stirred. Your mind can play tricks on you, Silas had said. But what if it wasn't my imagination? I tried to focus, to go about my routine, but the thoughts were relentless, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I was getting used to the rhythm of the lookout's life, the long days, the even longer nights, the endless time for writing and contemplation. But the warnings, the chilling entries in the old journal, had poisoned my solitude. I had been warned not to look outside after dark, but the journal hadn't explained why. Curiosity, A dangerous siren finally won. The sun had dipped below the horizon an hour ago, leaving the sky a bruised purple, the last vestiges of light clinging to the western rim. I crept to the window, peering out into the deepening gloom. It didn't take long. Movement. Through the trees, shadowy figures. They looked like humans, but twisted wrong. Their limbs elongated, bent at impossible angles. They moved with that same jerky, disjointed motion, gliding across the forest floor like grotesque marionettes. My body shook, an involuntary tremor that began deep within my bones. My instincts screamed. These weren't people. They were something else entirely, something ancient and unnatural. Dread coiled in my stomach, a cold, tight knot. I had to do something. Anything but sit there, paralyzed, watching them emerge from the deepening shadows. My eyes darted around the small room, searching for an escape, a distraction. A small closet door stood ajar. I pushed it open, revealing a cramped space filled with old blankets and pillows, musty with the scent of mildew. On a high shelf, nestled amongst dusty boxes, sat an antique radio. It was a behemoth, a relic from the mid-20th century, with two large tuning dials and a telescoping antenna. I wound the crank, a satisfying click whir as the mechanism engaged, then pressed the large on button. A burst of static hissed, filling the suffocating silence of the tower. "Hello," I whispered into the microphone, my voice thin and reedy, unsure if anyone, anything would hear me out here in this desolate place. Another crackle of static, then a voice, faint and distorted but growing clearer with each strained word. Is someone there? Can you hear me?" The voice was old, brittle, laced with an undeniable tremor of fear. A fear that resonated deep within me. "I can hear you," I said, a strange mix of relief and terror washing over me. "Who is this?" "My name's Finch," the voice replied after a long, agonizing pause, as if debating whether to speak at all. You're not supposed to be using that radio." His voice was deep, raspy, like gravel dragged across sandpaper, but underlying it was a current of profound dread, as if each word dragged him back through some unspeakable past. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I didn't know." "What are you doing up there anyway?" Finch demanded, a sudden urgency in his tone. "You're supposed to stay inside until morning. Don't open any windows, don't go outside. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see. And don't use that radio again unless it's an absolute emergency. Do you understand? The rules are there for a reason." His voice dissolved into a shriek of static, as if he were being dragged away, miles away, the signal abruptly cut off. I stared at the antique radio in my hands, dumbfounded, a chill crawling up my spine. Whatever Finch had been about to say, whatever dire warning he'd been on the verge of delivering, he hadn't gotten the chance to finish. And now the silence that filled the room felt heavier, more menacing than before. The wind howled outside, a mournful lament, rattling the windows as if in answer to my unspoken question. The rules, it seemed, were far more important than I could ever have imagined. As night deepened, the shadows in the room transformed, becoming hostile, predatory. The walls and windows of my small sanctuary echoed with loud, violent bangs, as if someone or something was throwing heavy rocks against them. Some impacts were so forceful I thought the glass would shatter, the old wood splinter. I dove under the cot, pressing myself against the floor, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the dusty boards. The violent sounds of breaking glass and splintering wood persisted, a terrifying crescendo, before slowly, agonizingly, fading away. It wasn't until long past midnight that they ceased completely. Then an unnatural silence descended, an eerie quiet that was almost worse than the cacophony. It felt like something was out there, in that impenetrable darkness, watching me from beyond my sight, unseen, unbreathing. No matter how many times I told myself it wasn't real, terror gripped me, a cold, unyielding hand squeezing my throat. Sleep was an impossible dream. Morning arrived, ushering in a brutal, exhausting wakefulness. I was about to utter a shaky prayer of thanks for the dawn when a soft voice whispered into my ear, not from the radio, not from outside, but from within the very air of the tower. I froze, the cold tendrils of fear creeping up my spine. "Let me in," the voice murmured, as intimate as a lover's breath. "I can help you. I know what's going on out there. Let me in and we'll talk about it. There's a way out of this for you, but only if you let me in." The temptation was overwhelming, a siren song of safety and answers, promising solace from the shadows outside my door. But the fear was there too, a primal instinct that screamed against it. The initial curiosity, the desire to uncover the truth, had been replaced by an intense, overwhelming urge not to find out. "Please open the door," the voice, whatever it belonged to, now sounded desperate, as if running out of time. "They're coming for us." I wrestled with myself, a silent, internal battle raging. Part of me, the human part, wanted to see, to know, to connect. But the other part, the part that had witnessed the impossible, knew better. As dawn's light began to creep over the horizon, painting long, skeletal shadows across my room, I made my decision. With trembling hands, I reached for the heavy bolt on the door. The sun, a sliver of golden fire, peeked over the distant mountains. I unbolted the door. A profound chill ran down my spine as I stepped out onto the porch. The forest was absolutely silent. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, no chirping of crickets. It was utterly devoid of life, a vast, still tableau. Unseen eyes seemed to watch me from within the impenetrable depths of the trees, a feeling so potent I almost expected a voice to call out from the darkness. But there was nothing. I shook off the feeling, dismissing it as nerves, a lingering side effect of the nightmare of the past few nights. The naive, adventuring spirit I'd arrived with seemed like a distant memory now. With one final, lingering look at the old wooden tower, its windows staring back at me like empty eye sockets, I braced myself and set out towards the nearest town. It wasn't far, maybe 6 or 7 miles, but it would take me most of the day, my gear weighing me down, my legs still trembling from lack of sleep and adrenaline. The air felt good in my lungs as I walked, following the old, disused dirt road that led into town. After about 20 minutes, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement amongst a thicket of bushes ahead. A pair of eyes, glowing with an unnatural, sickly green light, stared back at me from the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding. The creature emerged slowly, deliberately. It was a deer, or at least it looked like one at first, but as it drew closer, its face became clear and I choked back a gasp. It was wrong, twisted, deformed, as if someone had sculpted it from clay, but failed to capture the essence of life. The creature walked towards me, its hooves clicking softly on the dirt. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, to the small hunting knife I carried, but before I could draw it, the thing simply stopped, standing a few feet from me, its glowing eyes fixed on mine. They were mesmerizing, hypnotic, drawing me in. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then everything went black. When I woke again, the sun was high in the sky, a searing white disk overhead. The deer thing was gone, vanished without a trace, save for 2 sets of tracks leading away from where I'd stood on the road. One set was distinctly human, the other, the cloven hooves of an animal. I pushed myself up, my head throbbing, trying to shake off whatever had just happened, and continued my stumbling walk towards town. The silence of the forest was unnerving now, amplified, pressing in on me. No birds, no squirrels, just the rustle of leaves and the creaking of unseen branches, a symphony of dread. The forest stretched on endlessly, my legs growing heavier with each step. I turned around several times, convinced I'd seen something darting behind me, but there was never anything there. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted, a constant, oppressive weight on my shoulders. Every few minutes, a flicker of shadow would dart between the trees, just at the periphery of my vision, vanishing the instant I tried to focus on it. My heart pounded, and I picked up my pace, a frantic anxiety bubbling in my gut, just as my legs threatened to give out from exhaustion and dehydration. After hours of wandering through the oppressive wilderness, I saw it, the edge of the forest. With a profound sense of relief, I staggered into the small, sleepy town. My first priority was finding Sila's thorn. He was easy enough to spot, a man of his height, with that weathered face and distinctive beard, impossible to miss. "Caleb," he said, his voice laced with surprise as he saw me. "What are you doing here? I thought you had another week up in that tower." "I couldn't stay there, Silas," I replied, my voice shaking, cracked with dehydration and exhaustion. "I'm sorry, but something truly bizarre is happening up there." He looked back at me, his expression skeptical, his arms crossed over his chest. "Try me," he challenged, a hint of amusement in his eyes, so I told him everything. The soft, insidious whispers, the feeling of unseen eyes constantly watching, the shadowy figures that vanished when I looked directly at them, the terrifying footsteps on the stairs, the voices calling my name. I even recounted Alara's appearance, the tapping on the window, the desperate plea from Mr. Finch on the old radio, and finally, the encounter with the monstrous deer and the unsettling blackout. When I finished, Silas stared at me for several long moments, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You're not serious." I nodded, my throat tight. "I wish this was some kind of joke, a prank, but it's not, Silas. This is all real." Silas continued to stare, his blue eyes piercing, then suddenly he broke into a loud, booming laugh, a sound that startled me. "You had me going there," he choked out, tears streaming down his face from the force of his mirth. "I thought you were serious." "It's not funny, Silas," I snapped, my voice raw with indignation and fear. "This is genuinely terrifying me, and you're telling me this isn't normal." Silas stopped laughing, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his faded flannel shirt. His expression shifted, becoming serious, etched with a gravity that sent a fresh chill down my spine. "No, Caleb," he said, his voice quiet now. "It's not normal, but you're not the first one this has happened to." My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he continued, his gaze drifting towards the distant mountains where the forest stretched out, "there have been others. Lookouts who went up into that tower and came back down saying they saw things that weren't there, heard voices whispering in their ears, felt like they were being watched constantly, even when they were alone." "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" I demanded, my voice rising. Silas met my gaze, his eyes weary. "Because if I did, Caleb, would you have still taken the job?" I thought about it for a long moment, the lure of the quiet, the adventure, the escape. "Probably not," I admitted, my voice a quiet defeat. "Exactly. Nobody would take the job if we told them about all this beforehand, even though it's only happened to a few over the years. Some folks, they just call it cabin fever, the isolation playing tricks." "And what do you think?" I pressed, desperate for an answer, for an explanation that wasn't just a dismissal. Silas kicked at a loose stone with his boot, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I don't know what to believe, Caleb, but some strange things have gone down in these woods over the years. People disappearing without a trace, sometimes reappearing days later miles away from where they vanished, or never reappearing at all." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening, a sudden, suffocating feeling. "What are you trying to say?" "All I'm saying," Silas said, finally looking up, his eyes meeting mine, a deep, unsettling sadness in their depths, "is be careful out here, especially in those woods. They have a way of keeping what they want. After leaving that job, I tried to slip back into the rhythm of city life, but it was impossible. My experiences in the forest had carved an indelible mark on my soul. Every time I closed my eyes, the strange happenings at the tower played out like a terrifying, endless loop in my mind. The shadowy figures, the whispers, the tapping on the glass, they were never far from my thoughts, no matter how hard I tried to push them away. The city, once a comforting cacophony of human activity, now felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the encroaching silence. Sometimes, I swear, I still felt like I was up there, alone on that mountain, a sentinel in a forgotten world. And other times a chilling thought would surface. It felt as if everyone else could see them too, those dark figures, lurking just at the edge of our collective perception. Late at night, lying in bed, waiting for sleep that rarely came, the only sounds the distant sirens and the hum of traffic, I would hear them. soft whispers emanating from somewhere nearby. They sounded exactly like the ones I had heard in the tower, though softer, more insidious, as if coming from just beyond my bedroom door. Or perhaps even closer. Then there would be nights when they would be louder, almost deafeningly so, until it felt like someone or something was right beside me, breathing on my neck, whispering directly into my ear. Those nights were always followed by days where everything felt wrong, distorted, as if the world around me had subtly shifted on its axis, a feeling impossible to articulate. I sought solace with my family, but they could tell something was amiss. I was quiet, withdrawn, my laughter a forced sound. How do you explain what happened up there? How do you describe an ancient evil that twists the very fabric of reality? Thankfully, my parents didn't press. They were just relieved to have me home safe. Everything's fine, I'd tell them, a lie that grew heavier with each passing day. The whispers followed me everywhere now, even into the small patch of woods behind their house, a place that had once been my sanctuary. The forest, once a place of comfort, was now a place of terror. Every time I stepped foot into its shadowed embrace, I felt watched, stalked. Dark shapes moved at the edge of my vision, dissolving the instant I turned to confront them. One night, alone in my room, I stared out at the sprawling tapestry of city lights. Vancouver, bustling and bright, seemed alien, overwhelming after the profound darkness of the mountains. Unanswered questions swirled in my mind, a tormenting tide. I still wasn't sure what I had truly encountered in that forest. The only certainty was that it had changed me, fundamentally, irrevocably. Now, every time I looked into a mirror, I saw not just my reflection, but something else, something subtle and chilling beneath my own skin. A hint of that ancient darkness in my eyes. A faint, unnatural green glow that flickered, just for a second, in the depths of my pupils before vanishing. A part of me, the human part, still wanted to go back, to find out if it had all been a hallucination, a cruel trick of isolation and sleep deprivation. But another part, the part that had glimpsed the true nature of the wilderness, knew better. It knew that whatever had happened up there, it wasn't something that could be explained away by science or logic. I shook my head, trying to clear the terrifying thoughts from my mind, but they clung to me, a persistent echo, a low, sibilant whisper in the encroaching darkness. After a while, I closed the blinds, plunging the room into artificial night, but sleep, as always, remained a distant, taunting promise. What was your favorite part of the story? Want more stories like this? Follow for more.